In all three versions of Fullmetal Alchemist, the Rush Valley section of the story has one major purpose: to provide more character development for Winry. Now, in 2003, this is less necessary than in Brotherhood and in the manga at this point in the series, as Winry has had a bit more development in that series already up to this point. And actually, her development has been somewhat similar to what is going to happen in this section of Mangahood. In 2003, we've been consistently shown that Winry is willing to do a lot to help the brothers on their quest, and that she cares a lot about them in general. However, she also wants them to come home, and makes that very clear to them. I can't say I blame her for this. What Ed and Al are doing is incredibly dangerous, and Winry knows that and doesn't want them to get hurt. Basically, all of this is to say that Winry has been, so far, a better and more well-developed character in 2003 than she is in Mangahood, even if a lot of her major character beats are similar to Mangahood's. But to a certain degree, that's about to change. Now, in this episode of this video series, I won't be melding the manga and Brotherhood together as I so often do, because there is quite a difference with how they tackle this subject matter. So let's just start with the manga and talk about why it's by far my favorite version of the Rush Valley events. The section begins with a girl asking her significant other to buy her something, and with Winry also getting excited about something she wants to buy. This does two things. First, it encourages the viewer to compare Winry with this girl and to consider what Ed's feelings towards her are. After all, this layout could indicate that Ed is starting to view her in this light, and even if it isn't, it encourages the reader to really start thinking that he might. Considering where the relationship is going to lead, that makes sense. Second, it establishes Winry as a central focus of the chapter, and helps give her a certain individuality by contrasting her wants with another person's typical wants. Not that there's anything wrong with a woman wanting something pretty like jewelry. It's just that it's a lot more unique to want the metal arm. This encourages us to start viewing this section as Winry's section, which it is. Then there's this scene where some goons are taking people's money by beating them in an arm wrestling contest. After Ed is insulted, he gets involved and decides he's going to win it. Winry simply tells him that he doesn't stand a chance. Here, Winry is being established as a sensible individual, and then after it is revealed that Ed cheated in order to win, it is shown that she also has a strong sense of morality, as she's upset with him for cheating. These are by no means genius examples of character development, but they're worth pointing out, because it's important to flesh out characters in moments like these. In addition, it also creates a humorous contrast between Ed and Winry's personalities. Ed is a cheater, Winry doesn't like cheating, and they're going to butt heads because of things like that. Characters that have lots of opposite personality traits are usually fun to watch play off of each other in a story, and it's no different in Fullmetal Alchemist. After this, Ed's watch is stolen when a bunch of people start obsessing over his automail, and Ed goes after the thief. From the way Ed acts, it's clear that this watch means a lot to him, and that he does not want anyone to open it. Then this large chase scene ensues that gives us a pretty good sense of the landscape they inhabit in this chapter. Overall, it's a fun scene, even if going with that tone here is a little bit strange, especially after the previous chapter's somber close. Then Al gets directly involved here, helping his brother out in their pursuit, but Ed ends up getting attacked by this dog. While this may seem unimportant, it allows for this scene where Al gets really pissed off at the dog. So Al is also getting some character development here. After all, this aspect of his character is something that is almost entirely missing from Brotherhood, and something that I don't really recall seeing in 2003 either. In 2003, it seems likely that there was a thematic reason to remove this aspect of his character, but I really don't understand why some little scenes like these weren't included in Brotherhood. Couldn't they have taken a minute in an episode to show this side of Al? It just helps to make him feel like more of an actual person, even if it isn't all that important to the story's overarching plot in and of itself. Then there's some more humorous stuff. Ed tells the thief not to open the watch again, and Al captures her. I like that Al takes this sort of active role in the manga. And he'll be doing this in Brotherhood too. It's nice when he picks up the slack where his brother can't. It makes it clear that they're on pretty equal footing, whereas I always felt that Ed is far more active in 2003 than Al is, and far more capable of getting things done. Then Winry looks at Panina's automail and realizes how great it is. After seeing it, she strikes up a deal with Panina in order to go talk with the person who made it. Ed, of course, is unhappy with this deal, since it involves Panina getting off the hook for her crime. Here we see a fun reversal when compared to the earlier events of this section. Before, Winry was the one being all moral about the arm wrestling and advocating for rules and following laws and that sort of thing. Now Ed wants the rules. This is important because it shows how much Winry cares about learning as much about automail as possible, and about making the best automail possible. This, of course, was also given focus earlier in this section. Still, despite all this focus it's being given, it just seems like something that she happens to be interested in, probably because she grew up with her grandma around and she has a quirky personality or something like that. So far, her obsession with automail hasn't taken on any sort of deeper meaning, although it will by the end of this section. Then Winry gets taken to meet Dominic, the guy who made Paninia's automail. They talk to one another and get along pretty well, going on and on about automail. Here we see that Winry has a great understanding of automail, or at least a good enough understanding that she can engage in an interesting conversation with someone who seems to be a master of his craft. So this chapter shows that Winry is competent and capable. And it's only going to keep doing that, of course, because after Dominic tells her that he doesn't take apprentices, Winry tells Paninia to stop stealing because even if she thinks she's getting money for Dominic, Dominic would not want her to make money that way. While I do find this a little silly, I find it silly that Paninia never considered that before, it works well as far as showing that Winry is a very personable, persuasive, and once again, moral person. And besides, I guess sometimes people can get stuck in weird ruts like Paninia has. So hey, maybe it's not all that unreasonable. Maybe I'm just being a bit of a hard ass. And besides, this scene also shows just how much Winry has internalized Ed's logic, which is wonderful to see. She directly tells Paninia that she needs to have an equivalent exchange. Importantly, this displays how close Winry is to Ed and how seriously she takes his worldview and ideals. Even if they do joke around with one another, even if they do fight and yell at each other, she takes him very seriously. But again, Winry is shown as a somewhat complex character, and one that is willing to do immoral things, like opening Ed's pocket watch. And beyond that, it's just funny because this scene immediately follows Winry convincing Paninia not to pickpocket again. That juxtaposition is great, and is a wonderful example of the manga's fantastic moment-to-moment pacing. Of course, then Winry sees what's inside the watch and she falls silent and looks pretty upset. At this point, we, the readers, don't know why she's so upset about this, even if Don't Forget 3 October 11 has a certain level of ominousness to it. The reader being left in the dark on this is great because Winry is made closer to Ed than we are here, which further convinces us that she is in fact very close to Ed. After all, we've spent quite a bit of time with him so far, and we still don't know as much about his childhood because, unlike in Brotherhood in 2003, most of this stuff has been skipped. It helps to make Ed and Winry seem very intimate. Then there's the baby delivery thing. I'll just shorten this down to say that once again, this section of the story is focused on making Winry seem competent. Specifically, this section is meant to show that Winry can do things that Ed and Al can't, that she is a valuable member of this trio. Having her take on this sort of responsibility definitely makes her likable because, well, characters who can take charge in stressful situations are generally likable. After all this, Winry reveals that she opened Ed's watch, and they have a discussion about it. Although Ed is definitely upset, it's also clear that Winry is truly sorry, and that Ed doesn't want to actually be all that mad at her. Instead, he opens up to her more and tells her about a little of his pain, and about how pathetic he feels. And because Winry has seen this, she has a new resolve. She isn't going home. She's going to study how to make better automail so that she can help Ed as much as possible in his journey. Again, this makes her really likable. Now this chapter has shown us that she is competent, reliable, empathetic, intelligent, strong-willed, and a whole bunch of other good words. The point is that she's a solid character by the end of this section, even if her development hasn't been as strong as it is in 2003 prior to this. Furthermore, all of this is nice because it reveals to us something that's always been true about her character. She's so focused on automail, not just because this is some hobby that she has or something that she's been taught to care about, but she's focused on it because she wants to help Ed. So that's that for the manga. Now, Brotherhood. Well, honestly, I don't really have all that much to say about Brotherhood. It's fine, I guess. They basically just boiled down this section to its most major beats, with some minor changes here and there that don't change anything too much, even if they do somewhat weaken the strength of this chapter. For example, the romantic couple is taken out at the beginning, so that connection is lost. Also, Ed chasing Paninia goes from being a fairly lengthy and exciting scene to being something that happens really fast, which contributes to Rush Valley's overall rushed feeling. It really just feels like a place that Brotherhood needs to cover because the manga did it. What I mean is that the manga focuses enough on this place to make its inclusion feel justified and to have it make sense that it's here. Again, the main story beats are here, so this isn't as bad as the way Brotherhood handled the Lowart incident. The directing is way better here. Overall, honestly, Brotherhood here makes a whole bunch of small decisions that on their own don't matter all that much, but added together, make this section of the story feel almost useless. So, let's talk about 2003. Now, where the manga and Brotherhood use this time to make Winry seem more likable and to flesh out her attachment to Ed and his quest, 2003 does something that's quite different. See, 2003's Winry has already had more development than the mangas or Brotherhood's up to this point, and her relationship with Ed has been explored through that. After all, throughout Al's identity crisis, Winry played a pivotal role in helping Ed deal with his problems. Sure, this was also in Mangahood, but that part of the story went by faster there, so she didn't play as much of a role. So why is this episode still even here? Honestly, I don't know, and I wish it wasn't, because while it does develop Winry's character, it makes her less likable, and not in a way that makes her more complex and thus more interesting despite that unlikableness. Now, let me get this out of the way first. I'm not saying that her actions in this episode are exactly unreasonable. For the most part, I can see someone acting the way she does here. My problem is that, from a structural perspective, this episode doesn't add very much to the story, and what it does add could have been developed in a more interesting way at a more opportune moment. So let's go through this episode beat by beat, and I'll try to explain why I don't like it. Now, almost immediately, the conflict of this episode is made different from Mangahood's. We are introduced to Dominic, who isn't taken seriously by the people in the town, but who has Panina with him, who wants to prove that his automail is the best. So far, we're fine. This is all fine. So she goes and tries to win this arm wrestling contest, but loses because these danguses are cheating. So Ed jumps in there and cheats, but Winry doesn't know that right away and thinks that her automail is just that badass. But then Ed reveals to her that he cheated because the other people he was up against were also cheating, and she just goes nuts on him. Now this is where I start to have problems. While it's understandable that she would be upset, the way the show frames this is kind of confusing. The tone is all mixed up, with the music being very serious and dark sounding, while some of the animation and sound effects used are just silly. First of all, that dissonance isn't a good type of dissonance. It's just very odd. Second, it makes it hard to understand how the show wants us to view Winry, or rather, it encourages us to view her in a problematic manner. Having it happen here when she's seriously hurt makes it seem like she's the sort to resort to physical violence over a discussion when she's upset, but who wants to encourage others to solve their issues through words instead of violence. In other words, she ends up seeming kind of hypocritical, which is fine in that some people are hypocritical or annoying or overreact to things, but not fine in the sense that it makes her a less likable character, and really takes away from the way that she's already been developed in the series. And Winry's actions only become more confusing. I mean, I get that she's upset about her automail, that makes sense. So why does she go to Panina and end up wanting to help her prove that her automail is the best by competing with Ed? Now, I understand her wanting to make Ed feel bad by having him lose at something. She's upset, sure, that makes sense. And I also understand why she would empathize with Panina. In a way, Panina is who she wishes Ed would be, but who he definitely isn't. Still, it's odd that she would want to have her automail get outclassed by Panina's automail, considering that that's what she's upset about. So while there are some clever things going on here as far as mirroring characters and having them take up different places in the story thematically, and while this makes sense in that sometimes people do things that don't entirely make sense, I'm not a fan of it at all. It makes Winry seem kind of vindictive in a way that I just never felt she was previously in this series, and in a way that I never felt that she was in Mangahood either. Here she's just creating problems because she can't use her words with Ed to communicate why what he did hurt her feelings. Sure, she's going to get to that point, but I just wish that the whole thing with the watch could have been circumvented in this series. The fact that she's being ridiculous here is reinforced when Ed tells Panina that he can't let anyone beat him when his automail is involved. After all, if Winry had just talked to him, he probably would have said as much. Again, I'm not arguing that it's bad because it's illogical or anything like that. Sometimes people make silly assumptions about other people's feelings and do stupid things because of that. But what I am saying is that it makes Winry seem like a problem that Ed has to deal with, as opposed to an asset to the team. Even though at the end of this episode, the point is going to be that Winry is also kind of an asset. It seems like this episode's very confused. 2003 also gets kind of preachy with its message in this one, in a way that reminds me of episode 4's preachiness, with Al essentially telling the viewer what this whole episode was about when he starts talking about how important and special automail is and how automail can be an extension of the creator's care for another person. Sure, that's a good concept to explore, especially with Ed and Winry, but having it spelt out to the audience like this really goes against 2003's usual level of subtlety that so many love it for. Then there's this heart-to-heart talk that Ed and Winry have. It essentially begins with Winry trying to convince Ed to come back to Resemble, which, again, is opposite to what she does in Mangahood. After all, in that, she encourages Ed to continue by saying that she will do whatever she can to help him. Since we're probably on the protagonist's side and we probably want him to succeed in his quest, this is a good thing. Instead, here, after making some silly mistakes, Winry tries to convince Ed to return to safety. Of course, the show goes on to try and make us care about her feelings and tries to make us understand her, in that she views this as a sort of personal failure. She wishes her automail could be good enough to stop Ed from needing to continue his quest, and by extension, she probably wishes that she could help Al too. While this is a noble hope, it's obvious that she can't do this, and having her break down about it here reveals her weakness as opposed to her strength. Now, it's good for characters to show weakness. It makes them feel more human, and 2003 is generally far better at that than Mangahood is. But I don't think that they did a very good job of contextualizing this whole scene. After having her act in such a frustrating manner, this is also kind of frustrating. Overall, I think the idea that this episode was trying to communicate could have been communicated better if this whole episode had involved her directly trying to do something to help the brothers, and then having her fail. In that situation, you could in fact take this scene and basically transplant it in, and it would be pretty moving. And I honestly think that this whole episode is a big missed opportunity to help make Winry more complex, while also not making her significantly less likable. Alright, so now we've made it to the end of part 12, so thank you for watching. I do have something that I want to recommend to you guys. First of all, Ladamluff, a frequent commenter on here, made a great set of videos that is a character analysis of Ed, and I thought it was really good and worth checking out. So that's going to be in the description below if you want to see that, if you want more FMA type stuff. I really enjoyed that video, and I think it deserves some attention. And next, I wanted to just point out something, which is that I had to have a lot of self-control in this one, because I was bombarded by short jokes. And I didn't say a damn word. I didn't say a single word. I held that within myself, no matter how hard it was. And here's why. I had to do that because this person commented on a previous video saying that they thought I just got upset about short jokes because I'm short, and that's ridiculous. I wouldn't be. I'm not short. It doesn't matter if I'm short. It doesn't have to do with if I'm short. It's just I don't like. Honestly, I just don't like if people call me short. But I wish people would stop calling me short. I wish that the jokes would stop. But it's oh man. Short people got no reason to live. Why can't the jokes just stop, man? Short people got no reason. Short people got no reason. Short people got no reason to live.